In 1999, a young woman named Sarah Thompson moved to the small town of Ashland, Oregon with her cat. She was 24 years old and had just graduated from the University of Oregon with a degree in English. She was also a talented writer and was working on a novel in her spare time. In December, Sarah went missing. She was last seen alive at 9:30 a.m. when she left her apartment to go to work at the local newspaper. But she never showed up for work and nobody heard from her again. The police interviewed everyone in her life, but they all said that they had no idea what could have happened to her, and eventually the case went cold. But in 2019, the cold case detectives reopened the file and submitted a toothbrush that had been recovered from Sarah's apartment years ago to a new DNA testing facility. At that time, they were only able to get a partial DNA profile from the toothbrush, but it wasn't enough to match anyone in their database. Fast forward to today, new technology has made it possible to sequence entire genomes in a matter of days. Not to mention the massive increase in genetic information stored in law enforcement databases. So the cold case team decided to give Sarah's toothbrush another shot. In June of 2021, they got the results back. And there was a match. It was a man named James Palabra who had been arrested for burglary in Washington state. James had also been a suspect in several other burglaries in Oregon around the time of Sarah's disappearance. It turned out that James had lived in Sarah's apartment building and the two of them had briefly dated, but things didn't end well. On the night of December, James had come home drunk and started banging on Sarah's door. She let him in and asked if he was okay. He told her that he needed a place to hide because he had just robbed a pharmacy, and he asked her for money so that they could run away together. She said that she didn't have any money and that she didn't want to be involved in his crimes. And that's when he snapped and strangled her to death. He then stole her credit cards and cell phone and fled the scene. When the police confronted him with this evidence, James confessed to the murder. He gave them a detailed account of what had happened that night, including small details about the crime scene that only the killer would know, and everything he said checked out. They even found blood in the back of his closet that matched Sarah's DNA profile. So how did they manage to get a DNA profile off of a toothbrush that was 20 years old? Well, here's a brief explanation. When you give a sample of your DNA to the police, they typically take the epithelial cells from the inside of your cheek. These cells are then used to create a DNA profile, which is a list of the different allele or versions of genes that you have. If you're homozygous for a particular gene, meaning that you have two copies of the same allele, then that allele will be represented twice in your DNA profile. However, if you're heterozygous for that gene, meaning that you have two different alleles, then only one of those alleles will be represented in your DNA profile. This is why it's called a partial profile. Now, when the police ran Sarah's toothbrush through the DNA testing facility, they were only able to get a partial profile. This is because over the 20 years that the toothbrush had been sitting in the evidence locker, the DNA had degraded to the point where only a few small segments could be amplified and analyzed. However, these small segments contained enough information for the scientists to make a match. In other words, a single toothbrush, forgotten in an evidence locker, brought justice after 20 years. Proof that, in forensic science, nothing is truly lost. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more stories from the Minute Detective.